So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Perpetuity and Robert Half Collaboration Forum. It's great to see you all here, especially as this is the last week in our current series and the last forum before Christmas. My team are currently giving me grief that I'm not wearing a Christmas jumper, but feel free to don your own Christmas jumpers or festive hats. But I'm sorry, we didn't send the memo out about that. But my name's Paul Middleton. I'm a Managing Director in Perpetuity, and as usual, I'm joined here today by my colleagues from Perpetuity, as well as by my colleagues from our sister company, Robert Half. Our aim of this series, entitled Opportunity and Adversity, is and always has been from the very start to inspire us and to push ourselves further as we face up to the challenges of the period ahead. The news has plenty of doom and gloom. Lockdown uncertainty, continued Brexit uncertainty, economic contractions, but we try and see the light beyond that. Within this adversity, we believe there lies opportunity, and so we created this forum to enable us to debate those topics and issues that are most important to you, such that you can better navigate the challenges that lie ahead and seize the opportunities with greater confidence and speed. We've covered a few topics in this series so far: people versus profit, culture versus technology, leadership styles, hospitality, retail, the power of brands, to name a few. And this week we turn to a topic that you have asked us to cover, as it is such an area of uncertainty and so important to you, and that is the travel industry. So we have three great panelists here today to explore the challenges facing the industry and how the industry should best adapt to win back its customer base. Before we launch into the debates, I want to remind you for one final time, or for the last time this year at least, to please get involved in today's debate, because without your participation, there really is no debate. So as normal, I'm going to be nagging you to come off mute, give your opinion, raise your hand, be bold, get involved, or at least write something in the chat. If you're dialing in, you may need to press *6 to take yourself off of mute. And if you're on a computer, you can unmute yourself at any time. But whatever you do, please do get involved. So why have we framed these last few weeks as a debate? Well, we believe that now more than ever is the time for us and for you, our clients, our friends, our partners, to plan and deliver change. Because without change, without disruption, we run the risk of rapidly becoming irrelevant in the dynamic world that we're living in. And we think that if you can hear a number of perspectives that dig deeper into topics that are important to you, such as travel, it will help you make bolder decisions and hopefully the right decisions. So as I just mentioned, the focus for our debate this week is travel. With loyal business customers now learning to thrive in a virtual environment and leisure customers staying at home, how should the travel industry adapt to win back its customer base? And there are many themes we can explore here. The pandemic has led to national quarantines and global travel bans, bringing international travel to a standstill, with over 70% of countries at some point closing their borders to international tourism, according to a report this year by the UN. This is likely to have caused a drop of over 1 billion tourists across the globe, which in turn has put over 120 million direct tourism jobs at risk. The effect on the aviation industry has also been devastating. In late 2019, the International Air Transport Association published its Economic Performance of the Airline Industry report, which predicted 2020 growth in air traffic demand of over 4%. By contrast, it's predicted that the airline industry will lose around $157 billion in 2020 and 2021 alone, 5 times more than during the financial crisis. Recent analysis by Air Action Transport Group also suggests that up to 43% of jobs in the aviation and related industries may be lost by the beginning of next year as a result of the pandemic. So what should the travel industry do? As we sit here today in our virtual forum, many of us are much more comfortable than 12 months ago to conduct business meetings and to meet each other by leveraging the power of technology rather than traveling to meet face to face. Many companies have harnessed this new way of working and have not only saved millions of pounds in travel-related expenditure this year, but plan on continuing to make those savings next year. So when can the industry expect a recovery? What will it take to get people travelling again? How has the consumer behaviour of both business and leisure consumers changed? And how will the travel experience evolve? These are just some of the topics our panelists will be discussing today, and I'll introduce you to them shortly. Before I do, I'd like to ask for your help one last time this year, given it's Christmas, well, almost Christmas. We've been running these forums since March, and our aim is always to bring you the most relevant and valuable topics. So as this is our last one before Christmas, before we break to recharge our creativity and plan for the next series in the new year, we'd like your help with that planning, and would love to hear on the topics that you would like us to bring to you, along with your feedback and your suggestions around what you want to see in this forum. So to help hear and collect those suggestions, we have an online tool called Mentee that many of you have used with us before. And you'll see in the chat, my team has posted a link to that. And all I'd like to do is take 30 seconds at some point to click on that link, and it will take you to the screen you can see now. And if you just go into that, you can just type into the box there what suggestions you have for us, click submit, and you're done. It's anonymous. It will take you 20, 30 seconds, and any feedback, any inspiration, any ideas you have is very gratefully received. It's free form. You can write whatever you want, just keep it clean, and we'll maybe show you the results at the end. So whilst you're doing that, as promised, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Firstly, I'm delighted to introduce Jan Bramall. Jan joined Manchester Airport Group in 2018 as Group Finance Director, prior to taking on the role of Chief Financial Officer in December 2020. Manchester Airport Group is the largest UK-owned airport operator, contributing over £7 billion to the UK economy and supporting over 130,000 jobs in the supply chain. The group operates 3 UK airports: Manchester, London Stansted and East Midlands, seeing over 60 million passengers flying through its airports every year. Jan previously held VP Finance roles across listed international businesses, including JCI and Tyco, with responsibilities across Europe, North America, South America and Canada. And we're delighted that Jan can join us today. Next, I'm very pleased to introduce Manuel Brachet from Agencia. Manuel oversees Agencia's multinational and global client business worldwide. He also leads Agencia's consulting practice, meeting and events business, and commercial enablement on a global basis. Agencia is part of the Expedia Group and operates in over 60 countries, enabling over 14 million business trips last year alone, supporting companies of all size with their platform. Manuel joined Agencia and Expedia Group in early 2018, and prior to joining Agencia, he held various general management, demand generation, and customer success leadership roles in the renewable energy, software as a service, and telecommunications industries for leading Silicon Valley-based companies. Again, thank you to Manuel for joining us today. Next, I'm very pleased to introduce Victoria Tozer-Pennington. Victoria is the group editor of Airline Economics magazine, as well as director and founder of parent company Aviation News Limited. Aviation News Limited is a publishing and events company dedicated to reporting on the aviation, finance and leasing industry. Their 2 flagship publications cover the whole spectrum of commercial aviation industry. Its leading title for the aviation finance and leasing community, Airline Economics, is published bi-monthly and digitally. MRO Global is the second publication, dedicated to news and analysis for airlines and maintenance and repair organisations across the globe. Victoria's worked as a reporter on daily, weekly and monthly publications, both in print and online, in industries ranging from OTC pharmaceuticals to banking. And again, delighted that Victoria, Manuel and Jan can all join us today. So as normal, I'd like to ask our panelists to give us some brief, broad opening thoughts. They all look at the industry from different perspectives, and I'd like to start by inviting them to give us a brief insight into how they see the pandemic affecting the industry as a whole, as well as their particular sector. And Jan, maybe if I can just start with you for some brief opening thoughts, please. Jan, you're on mute. Those well-coined phrases. You're still on mute. Oh, there we go.
There you go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. So this is clearly the single biggest challenge the aviation industry has faced, reducing passenger volumes to near zero. As you said, from a MAG perspective, we contribute in excess of 7 billion to the UK economy last year, and it's an important part of the UK as we now look forward, depending on the recession ahead of us. So I think it's interesting for people to know that even with near to zero level passengers, all of our airports have actually remained open through the 6 months of the last 6 months. So in some instances, taking advantage of the government travel corridors that were set up, there were lots of flights to Turkey and Portugal, as I'm sure you're not surprised to hear, and repatriation of people. So especially in the early days, we were trying to get people back home. And then also performing as a valuable cargo hub. So we do have a lot of cargo, particularly out of our East Midlands airport. And if anything, we've seen growth in that business during the last 6 months. So I think to put it into perspective, overall, MAG, we've just announced our results for the 6 months ended September. We did 4.2 million passengers, which compares to 36.4 million for the last 6 months of last year. So that is 89–90% down, which is actually consistent with all other airports across the UK. And you can see that impact and the billions of pounds that people are losing across the aviation industry overall. Thanks,
Jen,
Paul.
thank you very much for that. Manuel, if I could turn to you now, please. Could you just give us a brief overview from your perspective?
Sure, Paul. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you.
Great. So as Paul mentioned, I run the multinational and global accounts business at Agencia, which is the corporate travel arm of Expedia Group. And we operate across the globe, so I can talk a little bit about what's happening in different regions as well. So what have we seen by way of impact of the pandemic on travel? I think as Jan alluded to, the impact has been quite marked. The overall travel industry has seen a roughly 70% drop in volumes from 2019 to 2020. So that's the entire industry. So that's air, that's hotel, that's rail, that's car, etc. So all sectors, if you will, blended together. The drop has obviously been significant. We've certainly never seen a 70% drop for a sustained period, but it does mask actually some very, some significant variations by sector, by industry, and by geography. So for example, by sector, car rentals, hotels, train lines are doing a bit better actually, and airlines unfortunately are doing a little bit worse than that 70%. By industry, we see, if you will, very different dynamics. So some industries out there, by their very nature, their very sort of project-based nature, or have had to continue traveling. So we continue to see construction businesses, energy businesses, I think health services for obvious reasons, transportation businesses like trucking, the public sector, government has not stopped traveling, even business services like audit services providers continue to travel, admittedly not at pre-COVID clips, but still at relatively healthy clips. And then other industries have, like financial services, have largely been grounded through this pandemic. So we see very, very different patterns depending on different verticals, some being more resilient, I'd say, than others during the pandemic from a travel perspective. And then by geography, we see very, very stark differences. So countries that have large domestic travel markets are typically doing better, and certainly countries that have gotten their arms around the pandemic relatively well and have large travel or domestic travel markets have done relatively better. The best example, I think, is China. So China overall is roughly 50% down in terms of travel volumes relative to 2019, but the domestic travel is about 85% of what it was in 2019. So domestic travel still very resilient in China. Unfortunately, I think in the West, our European and American American continental countries have not done quite the same job in getting their arms around the pandemic. So, but we definitely do see, even in Western Europe, even in America, the domestic markets being a little bit healthier, certainly, than the long haul.
Thank you, Manuel. Victoria, a lot of a lot of different perspectives there from Manuel. What would you add to that from your perspective? And I know that's going to be focused more on the airline economics, as indeed we can see in the background. But what would you add? And you're on mute, Victoria. May just be being a bit laggy to. No, you're still on mute. Okay, no worries. While you just unmute yourself, Victoria, Jan, maybe if I can just come back to you. So the question on a lot of people's mind is, what do you think the timing and shape of the recovery will look like for the travel industry? And also, from your perspective, what is needed to make that recovery happen?
Hi, no problem. So I think there's general consensus is this is going to take time to recover. So it could be 3 to 4 years before we get back to pre-COVID levels. I think what we are focusing on right now is really all around the testing regime. So if we can do the testing for specific countries, if you can do testing when you land so that you don't have to go into quarantine, then we believe that that will get the traffic moving again. But longer term, it will definitely take 3 to 4 years to come back.
3 to 4 years. Manuel, from your perspective, I know you look broader across the travel industry. Do you share the same thoughts?
Generally speaking, yes. I think we hear a lot about V-shaped recoveries and U-shaped recoveries. I think travel, I would expect it to be an L-shaped recovery, right? So a very progressive recovery that takes years to get back to pre-COVID levels. But there are pockets that will return faster than others. And in general, the way that I think about things is I'd sort of expect the recovery to come in concentric circles as the vaccine is deployed further and further into our population. So I think domestic travel clearly returns first and most robustly. Then, intra-regional travel, such as within Europe, for example, will follow, and then intercontinental really is the last, I think, to snap back. So countries and that have, I'd say, heavy exposure, if you will, to international, will obviously see things come back a little bit more slowly. I think what we'll need is really three things, Paul. I think we've learned by now that we clearly will need an effective and widely distributed vaccine, and one that the population embraces. But two, I think, and Jan started to allude to this, is we're going to need to reduce the current friction associated with travel. I mean, today, the number one barrier, our clients tell us this in every single survey, today the number one barrier to travel is government restrictions. And those won't entirely go away for some time. We will live side by side. The vaccine, if you will, distribution and administration will live side by side with continued government restrictions. So as an industry, we'll need to solve for those in a way that significantly reduces that friction and that disruption to the traveler. And then the last thing we'll need, the third element, is we're going to need to restore traveler trust.
So, and Manuel, just on that, how do you unlock traveler trust? How do you restore that traveler trust?
I think fundamentally there's several ways, and there's, I think, countless levers to do that. But at a very high level, you need to make sure that travelers have the right information, right, at the time, for example, of booking. They need to know what restrictions they're going to be subject to, what what vaccines or tests they may need, not only at point of origin but at point of destination. The industry itself is going to have to innovate around things like in hotels, moving to contactless check-in and room access. I mean, we've seen it, for example, for airlines and car rental companies for years. You don't actually have to talk to anyone before you actually board a plane and go to a check-in counter. Hotels are doing the same thing. Clearly, all all travel suppliers, whether they be airlines or hotels, are going to actively have to market, health and safety protocols they're embracing. So that's just to name a few. The industry is working on a whole portfolio of these measures to get people comfortable getting back on the road.
Thank you.
That's right. If I can add to that, so for example, even the changes in quarantine rules that come down on travellers within 24, 48 hours notice. If travellers had more confidence that they would get 7 days notice or 14 days notice to any changes, then again, I think that restores people's confidence to travel. The testing regime, if it becomes cheaper and quicker and all of those things, then I think it just frees up people's willingness to travel again.
And so, Victoria, can I just test if we can hear you yet or not? Because you're still showing as mute. It might just be worth, Victoria, just dialing back in, because I'm not sure what's happened there, but you seem to be permanently muted. But I think she's going to try. So, Jan, if I may come back to you, do you think testing facilities will become the norm and permanent facilities within airports?
So actually, we've set up testing facilities now at all of our airports. So they offer all of the 4 different types of testing, as well as the new test and release scheme, which will come in on the 15th of December. So yeah. I do think that will become the norm. It's also linked in with Boots, so they can provide those testing facilities for you as well. So we're working with local high streets. I think it's becoming the norm already. Obviously, depending on then how the vaccine gets rolled out over the next 12 months.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Victoria, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Can we hear you?
No.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Wonderful, we can hear you. So Victoria, we've had a number of perspectives there from Manuel and Jan around what's needed to kickstart that recovery, from a vaccine, reducing friction associated with travel, the traveller's trust, testing. What, from your perspective, is key to kickstarting that recovery, and what do you think that the shape of the recovery will look like?
Well, I think the key thing is that people want to travel. They're not traveling because they're scared to. I don't think so. I think there's a real demand. It's the quarantine, and like I think has already been discussed, that is just restricting. People can't travel to somewhere and take another week or 2 out of their schedule. This is talking about business travellers in particular. So I think the only thing that's holding back that kind of resumption in demand is restrictions. So they need to be lifted. I think the airlines have done a good job. They've been at the forefront of the pandemic because the borders have been closed, but they've done a good job at reducing their capacity and flying less flights, but they're becoming more full. So they're actually doing better in a bad situation. In terms of the recovery, I think that you're right. I don't think we're going to see a recovery until probably the end of last year, and then we won't get back to 2019 levels for another 2-3 years. I think I would agree with the others.
So with those types of thank you, Victoria. With those type of projections, and despite the prospects of a post-vaccine recovery, and maybe Jan, if I can come back to you with this, and obviously everything we've mentioned is shrouded in significant uncertainty. With months of suppressed passenger numbers, how are airports, airlines and other part of the industry managing to survive financially?
Yeah, so if I give you an example from how we've survived, so we have been supported through very supportive shareholders. So they've had to contribute 300 million of additional funding, as well as we actually sold our property portfolio for 340 million. So that's actually now put us in a healthy liquidity position. So we've got cash reserves in excess of 650 million. So in addition to that, the rating agencies have been very supportive. So they've just reconfirmed our BBB plus and Baa1 ratings. So again, there's a recognition that we need to get through the next 12 months, as well as covenant waivers for that period. So I think it's a number of different things that people have had to do, whether it be going back out to the banks or whether it be to shareholders, just to try and kind of get everything in place for the next 12 months, where that uncertainty is the most heightened.
And thank you, Jan. Victoria, does the same apply across the airline industry? Have we seen supportive shareholders, or will the level of kind of government funding and subsidies need to continue?
Well, there's been a mixed bag. Airlines are really expensive. I think you've all seen on the news about cash burn. You know, they're burning through millions every day. And so they've been very good at reducing that. And also with the furlough scheme and payroll support, particularly in the US and in the UK as well, they've been using that a lot. But they've also had to raise their liquidity. A lot of the first movers, when the crisis first hit, were very good at raising new debt, new equity at very good prices, but as the crisis went on, that pricing is tightened. So they're actually levering more and more assets. They're being more creative, and actually they've been quite successful in raising liquidity. I'm particularly focusing on the American airlines because they've had a lot of support and they've got a good capital markets support and shareholders over there. I mean, as well, the government has supported them. Also, you've got government support for airlines like Singapore Airlines, for example, a very strong shareholder who's managing to survive. But there's others that haven't had much support at all. So it's a mixed bag. And I do think they're going to have to raise a lot more debt and have a lot more equity raises to survive really into summer next year and beyond, because all of this debt eventually will need to be refinanced. And banks are supporting their clients and top tier credits, but as this crisis goes on, I think that banking capacity for kind of airline and aviation assets will become reduced, and so they'll have to look at more creative ways of raising more finance as well.
Thank you. And Victoria, obviously key to that, or key to helping with that finance, is just the surge in passenger numbers. And it's interesting, there's a question coming on the chat, and maybe Jan, maybe if I could start with you on this, but just talking a little bit about, do you have a view on vaccine passports, and if vaccination will be something that, certainly from an airport perspective, you'll be looking at to make compulsory for almost people to come into the airport and to travel?
I mean, I think there's again quite a lot of press around this area. Will a vaccine passport, does that mean that you don't have the symptoms, or you're not a carrier if you've been vaccinated? And I think there's still a lot of uncertainty around that. Would that encourage people to have the vaccine? Again, there's debate in the press about some people whether they will choose or not to have the vaccine. So that might certainly be one way to encourage people. So I think it's too uncertain at this point.
Okay, and well, to see that across wider parts of the industry, that desire for almost a vaccination passport?
Yeah. So I think I have a little bit, perhaps a little bit more conviction around this than I think what Jan just expressed. I think that part of that reduction in friction that we talked about is, I think, the evolution of this. Does everyone remember this? This is the international certificate of vaccination yellow cards that many of us got used to over the last probably 30, 40 years of travel. And it documents which vaccines you've gotten, and I think what we're going to see eventually, as the vaccine becomes more generally available, is it's not difficult for me to envision that effectively an electronic yellow card will be required, particularly for international travel. You've heard Qantas sort of make noises around this. They didn't. It was widely reported as a policy statement. I don't think it was a policy statement. I think it was more of a strong hypothesis that that people would be asked to show some sort of vaccination certificate before boarding an international flight. I think that that we are headed in that direction, and I think that, by the way, that's no different than what we have today, right? Today, if any of us want to travel to a country that has an endemic location for yellow fever, we need to show that we have a yellow fever vaccine, right? And I think that we will see an evolution of that, if you will, a variation on that theme eventually, with these sort of electronic versions of these yellow cards. It'll likely be, by the way, multiple applications to manage in the near term, as the requirements are actually driven by countries. For example, China is using a Green Pass QR code. I mean, there are a number of worldwide organizations. So obviously IATA for airlines, but the World Economic Forum is also trying to create standards around this. I think eventually we get to something like that once the vaccine is widely available. But I think Jan makes some very strong points that we don't actually know yet if the vaccine, if having received the vaccine means that you actually can no longer transmit the virus. So there's a lot still to come, but my hypothesis is that we're headed for some sort of automated, app-based, if you will, type of vaccine passport or your vaccine yellow card.
Thank you, Manuel. That's fascinating to hear. And Victoria, you can certainly see how something like that would kickstart, people or giving people the confidence to get back on the planes. But do you see in the meantime, picking up one of the questions in the chat, that there's going to be existing players unfortunately going out of business or further consolidation within the industry?
I think that's inevitable. I mean, if you think about the amount of airline bankruptcies there have been so far, it's been really kind of subdued to my mind. I don't think that the losses and the pain has trickled through yet. And I think that many airlines are hanging on for those summer bookings. And if they don't come, or if the last minute summer flights don't come, I think there's going to be some real pain, and there'll definitely be some consolidation, particularly in Europe. There are way too many airlines that are barely making a profit in good times. So I think that's probably almost a positive to come out of it, not for the airlines concerned, but I think it will make a better, stronger market once they're through that period. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, I'd like now just to move on to innovation, if I may, and just pick up, because the industry kind of during this time, along with many other industries, it has been innovating to enhance the customer experience in order to attract back those customers as fast as possible. Maybe Jan, just starting with yourself, can you just give us a view on what innovation you've seen within the airport, and whether that's happening fast enough from your view to drive back that customer demand and enhance the customer experience to where it needs to be?
Yeah, so I think there's innovation in different ways. So certainly around the airports, it's about creating a new, safer travel system. So whether that's everything from face masks to frequent cleaning to sanitizers to social distancing, but then also taking that a step further to the online check-in. At some point in the future, we'll be able to check your bag in at home, the online retail offering throughout the airports. But again, taking it another step further, the way technology is evolving in cars and planes and everything. So it's lots of technology, lots of changing innovation in lots of different parts, really.
And Jan, just picking up on one question on the chat that's kind of linked to that. So you've had a very long period of operating at reduced capacity. And obviously that isn't a scenario you probably had in your playbook as you looked at 2020. How have you approached ramping back up to capacity, both in your own teams, but also working with third parties? And how are you planning that things might change around that?
I think from, again, an airport's perspective, we're a fixed infrastructure. So we've got the infrastructure, we're ready to take on those increasing passengers. If anything, we're just about to launch Terminal 2. For those that are local to Manchester will know there's a whole new terminal, which will be opened nowhere near to the extent that it would have been opened had it not been for COVID, but we will start to see some flights going out of there. So the infrastructure is ready. In terms of the people, then again, I think we were a little bit, we've tried to protect jobs. So the furloughing scheme has certainly done that. We have obviously had to make some redundancies, but again, we've got the people, we've got the infrastructure, we're absolutely ready for when that travel returns.
Thank you, Jan. So Manuel, if I may just turn to you now, back on the innovation side. We've heard a number of things from Jan there around how the airports are innovating and changing. When you look at the broader travel industry, do you see similar themes? Can we expect different changes in hotels, car rentals, and so on?
So I think absolutely. I think for hotels is I'd say sort of the one that I think is closing the gap. I'd say that relatively fastest. I think that the days of after a long flight queuing at a check-in counter at a hotel are probably those days are numbered. It will obviously take a long time to get through the entire portfolio of hotels. I mean, there are obviously very large global and regional chains, and then there's a super long tail of independent hotels. And so the degree to which that change comes to those hotels is going to take time. But I think, I think there's now going to be an expectation of effectively contactless check-in, not having to queue at the front desk, walking right into the hotel and going right to your room based on sort of app-based functionality. I think those are already underway, and I think that's going to be a very significant change on the hotel front. I also just think, and just coming back to this, is the information flow is going to be dynamic for the foreseeable future. We don't know exactly how long it'll take to stabilize, but that notion of really, if I think of big, like the global travel platforms, of which Expedia is one and Agencia is one, really serving up that information to the prospective traveler. What do you need? Which app will you need? Do you need to print it out? What procedure will you need to follow? Do you need to have a guest letter from someone you're visiting at the point of destination, right? Those types of informations that are critical to that sort of restoring trust, if you will. Those are going to take very sophisticated automated solutions and innovations, and they're already underway. In fact, within my own company, we are well down this path. But there's no doubt that COVID provided the shot in the arm to accelerate that roadmap item to the present. So there's a lot of innovation at every level. Even within the airline space, automating unused tickets and voucher redemption. I mean, this was already done reasonably in an automated fashion in the Americas, in EMEA and APAC. This was less common. So there's a lot that's being done across the value chain to drive down that friction and to restore that traveler trust.
Thank you, Manuel. Victoria, then, just picking up on that last point, when you look at airlines in particular, do you think airlines are investing in innovation enough in order to get back the type of passenger numbers they need?
On the customer side, I think that they've done a lot. They've been trying to educate people on how safe it is to travel in terms of the HEPA filters and things like that. But I think that they have really been quite flexible in trying to attract them back. But on the business side, one of the things that they have done that's been a real bright light in the darkness really has been the success of the air cargo market. And they haven't been able to fly passengers, but they've been able to convert passenger aircraft to carry freight, which has allowed them to earn some revenue in basically when all of the passenger aircraft have been grounded. So I mean, that really shows an innovative kind of nature of the airline industry to actually just try and serve its passengers and clients as well as it can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just talking to that as well. I mean, we've seen, obviously it's great to see that that the cargo numbers have continued. I guess just picking up on another point that we see in the chat, and that's about what I describe as like the sustainability imperative. In previous weeks of this forum, we've definitely seen how the demands of the consumer have shifted during the pandemic, with a desire for products and experiences that are more ethical, sustainable, empathetic and personal. And with the recognition that our carbon footprint this year will have been a lot lower because of the lower air travel and the lower level of emissions. How do you think the travel industry needs to adapt to meet this evolution in consumer demand? Maybe particularly amongst, as Justin says in his question, amongst the younger generation. Will we see a shift away from air travel to other forms of transport, or will the airlines need to meet that challenge head on? Again, maybe Victoria, if I could just kick off with you on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think aviation and airlines in particular has a really bad image in terms of the environment. They're very a visual polluter, and they've been paraded through the press. But you have to remember that air travel only accounts for 2% of global emissions, and of course that still needs to be reduced. Road travel, though, is still responsible for a lot more than that. So the changes the industry has made over the past few decades has been really significant. I mean, since jet aircraft have come invented in the 60s, they're now 80% more fuel efficient, and the new generation aircraft such as the A320 Neo and the Max, and needless to say, they're now 20% more fuel efficient. So the industry is advancing and changing all the time. It really does have an eye to improving its sustainability kind of credentials, and they've made huge inroads as well about using sustainable aviation fuels. And but it's an all-electric technology for aircraft is for large passenger travel is still decades away. So these are the things that they're trying to do that can be done much more quickly and actually have an impact straight away. And many airlines are also committed to becoming net zero. They're doing a lot within their own organizations to do that, and also they are offering, when you buy an airline ticket, you can also buy a carbon offset. And I think, but it also has to be remembered that it's still the most efficient way of transporting a lot of people long distances compared to any other form of travel. Yeah. So I don't see air travel changing. I think maybe people will take fewer shorter flights, but are they going to start ordering next day delivery, that comes straight to their house, which has a huge amount of carbon emission impact, and road travel, for example? I think that I think we just need more information on how much carbon you're actually burning on all aspects of travel rather than just aviation. But I think it really is in the spotlight, so it's had to make all of these initiatives. And I think it could do a better job, I do think, but it is working behind the scenes very seriously on this.
Thank you, Victoria. Jan, just reflecting on that, how is Manchester Airport Group addressing this challenge around sustainability and around this shift in consumer demand to wanting a more ethical, sustainable, empathetic and personal kind of experience in order to where they're going to spend their money?
I think you're right. It's definitely high up there on our list of priorities. Our operations have already, we're at carbon neutral, and we've signed the industry commitment to reach full net zero carbon by 2050. Albeit we'd like to get to net zero by 2038, so that's our own internal target. We talk about it in our own kind of annual reports, we talk about it in our releases to the stock exchange. It's really, really important to us. And actually we've announced a competition for zero landing charges for the first zero emission aircraft at our airports. So again, just to show that we are absolutely serious about this and moving in the right direction.
That's great to hear. And Manuel, from your perspective, you look across the broader industry. Who's leading in this space, and where does more need to be done?
Well, I think there's I think that we'll find that COVID will turn out to have been the great accelerator of trends that had already begun pre-COVID, right? We're seeing it. We're all working from home for the time being. Some amount of that is going to stay. Online retail, some video conferencing. I think we'll find that sustainability received a bit of a boost as well from this pandemic. What we see, especially on the corporate side, for example, is really companies, the company demand to, for example, surface carbon footprint information within when you're making a travel decision. So you're punching an origin and destination into a search bar. Effectively, companies, travelers, are expecting to not just understand what the price of a given leg is or a different form of transportation on a certain route is, but they want to know more, right? They want to know what's the carbon footprint, so that and increasingly actors across the entire value chain are having to surface that, and will have to surface that to help travelers make the best decisions, or ones that are in line with their preferences. I think we also I think there've been a lot written in the press, even pre-COVID, about what we call air-to-rail substitution, right? In countries with viable rail networks and capacity. Certainly in the Nordics, Germany, Italy, China, there's already been there have been some signs, some green shoots of those types of preferences kicking in. I think under COVID, that will I don't think it's necessarily going to, in and of itself, make a great leap forward, but I think COVID will have been, at the margin, if you will, a slight accelerator there, primarily because government airlines, I think, Victoria was just referring to the government supports that a lot of airlines are receiving. A lot of governments are taking the opportunity to provide that support, but with strings attached, right, to encourage some more sustainable practices. And in France, for example, the French government made financial support for Air France conditional upon Air France retiring several domestic routes where high-speed, TGV lines are available. So I think we're going to see, some of those economic imperatives and government supports move that needle a little bit.
But I guess here's where it becomes real, Manuel. And just again, reflecting on a comment in the chat, do you think consumers will be willing to pay more for carbon neutral travel of any form?
Personally, I think so, but I don't think that's necessarily being teased out by COVID. I think that's a more generational or sort of value-based evolution in our society. I mean, the reality is millennials now make up more than 50% of the workforce, and I think that's an evolution that started linked to more of a sort of perhaps a generational or a value-based change, and I certainly see that continuing.
Right. No, thank you. Now, Manuel, you also mentioned how we're the growth in video conferencing, and obviously there's been a boom over the last few years where and that video conferencing technology has potentially changed the business travel landscape forever. And Victoria, if I may just start with you on this, how can the industry win back market share from those business people now choosing or indeed preferring to meet virtually and save significant pounds and dollars on their travel budgets?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, isn't this? I mean, I think everyone's liking saving money, but when you're on a Zoom call with a client and in the background your competitor is there having lunch, you're going to realize that very quickly you need to get back traveling and meeting your clients. I think particularly, and I mean, we run a lot of events around the world. They're very popular. This is how people do business. We've done 9 virtual events this year, and although we're trying very hard to make them as interactive as possible, they're not the same. People are so keen to travel. They're zoomed out, I think, that the problem is. And I think it has its place. It absolutely does, perhaps for lower ticket industries, but for big ticket like ours, I mean, someone's not going to pay 100 million for an airplane without looking somebody in the eye first. I think business travel is definitely going to come back. It will take a little bit more time, I think, but leisure travel will certainly come back first. But I think business travel, it's not going to go away.
Manuel, you were nodding to that. Do you see the same tension? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that video conferencing existed alongside travel before COVID, and it'll undeniably have a bright future beyond it. Even at Expedia Group here, we've been using video conferencing for daily meetings for years, but we still traveled a lot. I think what we're going to see is, if I looked into my crystal ball, I'd say we're going to see a split in the way that, for example, organizations think about business travel, with each having its own bar, if you will. The bar will probably remain a little higher for internal meetings, internal events, sort of workshops and trainings and that sort of thing, for a little longer. However, as I think Victoria said, for interactions with clients, with suppliers, with external partners, I think travel will come back relatively quickly, both because in-person interaction is critical to building that trust that makes you confident to sign that contract or make that investment. But as Victoria, I think, correctly pointed out, it's a question of relativity. If your competitor is meeting with your client, you've got to get out there as well. So there's going to be a bit of a peer pressure effect, I think, on a lot of these sort of on the more commercial aspects of business.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great to see there's some warming statistics coming through on the chat. A comment from Jan around how, as an independent travel agent, seeing bookings up 40% year on year, which I think will, is great to see. But what that does link into, and and something just to dig into maybe in the last few minutes, is around pricing, because if some of those business people, if that bar has risen, as you say, Manuel, and more business people are staying at home and doing video conferencing, to what extent is that likely to have a knock-on effect of the price points of leisure travel? As we know, people that are generally turning left on those planes are funding some of the seats on the in economy and so on. So can we expect price rises across the board, or instead will industry participants be looking to differentiate on price to capture market share? Maybe Victoria, just a few thoughts from you initially on that, and then I'll come to Jan and Manuel.
Yeah, thanks. So there's a couple of things here, isn't there? I mean, the more airlines that fail, fares are likely going to rise, but frequencies are depressed and they're likely to remain so because airlines are trying to operate more efficiently and more profitably. So that means higher prices. But equally, new airlines will launch and they'll fill those gaps, and fares will come under pressure. And even we've already seen Ryanair offering, I think, 2-for-1 fares on certain routes, and they've done it before. And people, low-cost carriers in particular, they may launch a fares war to shore up their business and their market share. But if passenger demand remains weak, which I don't think it will be, there'll still be that pressure, because in June, when the rules were relaxed in Europe and China, airline bookers went through the roof. So I think that the passenger demand will come back as soon as virus and quarantine rules are lifted. Business travel, I think we said, probably will remain depressed, and that the front of the plane pays for the back of the plane. So there's a little bit of price pressure there. It's difficult to know what will happen, but all of those factors will play out. I think flag carriers will raise prices, but then eventually they'll have to cut to compete in a renewed marketplace, I think.
Jan, do you agree with that? Price rises in the short term?
I think it'll be both. So it's very much demand driven. Low-cost carriers, we've seen examples now, as Victoria just said, about reducing prices to increase market share, but we've also seen examples, if you try and book some flights over Christmas, there's some very expensive flights to Barbados and such like. So I think we're seeing a mix. It's going to be demand driven.
And Manuel, you see that as well? Is there a difference between domestic and international as well, as you look at your statistics across the board?
I mean, by and large, what I can speak to is what we've observed, if you will, in business travel, say over the last 8 months. I think we have observed average ticket prices for air on an overall basis down about 10%. Average daily rates for hotels a little bit more than that on average. I think the tricky part of extrapolating forward there is that there's a lot of very different traveler behavior that's been exhibited over the last 8 months. So people are traveling more domestically than long haul, right? That obviously will affect your industry average ticket prices. And so I think it's difficult to project those behaviors forward. I agree with Jan and with Victoria that fundamentally it comes down to, will we see some industry consolidation? How quickly capacity and frequency comes back online as sort of key factors there.
Thank you, Manuel. So to close in a proper festive spirit, I guess, and Jan, I'll come to you with this first. So if you could have one thing, if Santa could bring you one thing for Christmas from a business perspective, what would that be? What's going to make the most difference to Manchester Airport?
We'd like some government sector specific continuation, whether that be funding through the furlough scheme or business rates. We'd love some full support from the government that's specific to the aviation industry.
And Victoria, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the UK has not really supported the industry as well as it could. I mean, it's had the furlough scheme in place, which has helped, but compared to other jurisdictions like the US, they've really propped up their industry. But obviously, there's a caveat to that, isn't there? You can't survive on government aid forever. So what we'd really like is all the restrictions to be lifted and people to travel again. That's what I want for Christmas.
And can you just give us some insight on that? Have you seen a very different global, when you look at the global aviation industry, have you seen a different approach, in other countries that we should be looking at and emulating?
Yeah, I think the US government has supported its airlines very early, and there's another kind of package of measures waiting to be approved on the Hill at the moment. So they have been very supportive, but equally the American airlines going into the crisis were strong, well, probably the strongest airlines in the world anyway. For example, I mean, airlines in Latin America, for example, have had no support whatsoever, and we've seen a couple of failures there. Some in Southeast Asia too have been scrabbling to get government support, but which hasn't come. Chinese airlines are doing okay. So, you know, it's been a definite mixed bag. But I think when this is all over and those airlines that have had government support are going to be in probably a better position than those airlines that have had to leverage and raise debt and sell the crown jewels, you know, just to survive, because they're not going to be able to compete, you know, with leaner airlines that may start up or can do fares wars and things like that. So it's going to be a struggle. So like I said, I think the recovery is going to be hard. I mean, surviving COVID is one thing. Surviving the recovery is going to be difficult for some airlines.
Fantastic. Thank you, Victoria. Manuel, last thoughts from you. What would you and the team at Agencia like from Santa?
I think certainly, you know, government support for suppliers, I think, is on balance good for the industry. I mean, you need that supply there. I'd say we'd like to see speed in developing some of those frictionless solutions to what will be, you know, what we believe will be some continuing travel restrictions. We see that at the end of the day is the #1 barrier to people actually moving about the planet. So taking, you know, we recognize those will probably remain in some form or another, or there will be conditions, maybe they won't be restrictions, but really quickly getting to standards so that, you know, not everyone is doing their own thing and creating more confusion in the marketplace, I think will be a net benefit for all of the actors in the travel industry.
Manuel, thank you very much. And Jan, Victoria, thank you ever so much for those perspectives. We've run out of time. So I'd like to thank you, our panelists, for today, for the time and your perspectives you've given us. To everyone else, if you like what you've heard, please feel free to contact us at Pativity and Robert Half, and even our panelists directly on LinkedIn. I'm very, very sorry if I didn't get to your question directly, but our challenge today, as it has been throughout this series and our previous series, is to put some of what you've heard into action. Because that's it. That's the end of our series for this year. But I would like to say we'll be back next year. We are planning on a new series, and so please look out for the email and the LinkedIn post that will come around that. And please also, if you'd like to get involved as a panelist or any further ideas, please let us know. Thank you very much for the feedback you've put into our Mentee chat. You'll see my team is also posting something about a top risk survey. Again, that's all. Any feedback you have around there will be very gratefully received. It's a survey to, again, just anonymously tell us what you think your top risks are facing next year. And so if you can fill that out for us, we'll be very, very grateful. So all that's left me to do really is to thank not only our panelists and you all for joining us, but also our production team here at Pativity and Robert Half for their efforts, inspiration and support this year. And that's from Peter, Layla, Gary, Kathy, Supriya, Sean, Jay, Becky, and everyone else who supported the forums this year. We've really enjoyed it. We'll be back very soon. So until next year, on behalf of my Pativity and Robert Half team, we'd like to extend our best wishes to you all for Christmas and the New Year. Stay safe, be kind to each other, and we look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Thanks very much, everyone.